For 18 months, one of the most powerful billionaires in Korea watched his daughter disappear. She sat in her wheelchair and stared at walls and stopped eating or speaking. She had stopped being the little girl who used to draw hearts in the frost on the kitchen window and was more a shadow of herself. He flew her to specialists in Tokyo, in Zurich, in Boston. He spent fortunes. He moved mountains. Nothing worked. Then one afternoon, a 10-year-old boy in a worn school uniform slipped through a gap in his hedge and did what all of that money could not. He made her laugh. He came back the next day, and the next, until the day her father came home early. What he did next was the worst decision of his life. And what happened after that was the beginning of everything. There's a saying that the best thing in life are free. This is a story where love, laughter, and hope connects people of different worlds. As you listen, remember a smile can be that flicker that ignites a heart and spread love around. Let's take a breather to hit the like and subscribe button to support the channel. Don't forget to put on your notifications so you don't miss out on the next story. Now let's brace up as we dive back into the story. Jae-Sung Lim was not a man who lost. Not in business. Not in negotiations. Not in life. His name alone moved markets. His empire in technology, real estate, and digital infrastructure had made him the most feared and admired man in all of Seoul. The financial press called him Kielui Son, the Iron Hand, because everything he touched turned to success, and everything that stood in his way eventually moved aside. He had built his first company at 26 with nothing but a rented desk and a borrowed laptop. By 35, his face appeared on the cover of every major business publication in Korea. By 40, he had offices in 7 countries and a reputation that walked into rooms before he did. He was precise. He was disciplined. He was cold in the way that powerful men sometimes become cold. Not from cruelty, but from the exhausting performance of never being permitted to be soft. But there was one place where Jae-Sung Lim was never cold. One person who could walk into his study in the middle of the most important call of his week, and he would end it without apology. One person whose laughter could pull him away from a boardroom, from a deadline, from the iron grip of his own ambition, and make him feel like none of it mattered at all. Soo-yeon, his daughter, his whole heart walking around outside his body. She had come into the world on a rainy April morning, small and furious, and absolutely certain she had somewhere important to be. And for the first moment Jae-Sung held her, he had understood something he could not have put into words then, but knew completely now, that everything he had built before her was preparation, and everything after her was for her. Soo-yeon at 3 had memorized the names of every bird in the garden and insisted on introducing them to visitors by name, correcting adults without embarrassment when they got it wrong. Soo-yeon at 5 had decided she would be a pianist and had sat at the upright in the sitting room for 2 hours every afternoon with a focus that made Jia say she had inherited her father's stubbornness and Jae-Sung say she had inherited her mother's passion, and both of them were right. Soo-yeon at 6 had discovered that if she tugged at her father's tie firmly enough and looked at him in a specific way, he would abandon whatever he was doing and carry her on his back through the garden while she pointed at the sky and described clouds in elaborate detail as though she were a professor of clouds and he were her most important student. She was the loudest thing in that mansion. She was the brightest thing in it. She filled every room she entered and several she had only passed through. And on winter mornings, she would press her small palms flat against the kitchen window and draw little hearts in the frost, while Jia hummed softly at the stove, and the whole house felt like a living thing, warm and full and certain of itself. Jae-Sung had not known, in those mornings, that he was living inside the best chapter of his life. He had been too busy building things to understand what he already had. Then came the Tuesday evening in November. He had been working late as always. Jia had taken Soo-yeon to her piano recital, the one Jae-Sung had promised to attend, and then rescheduled because of a board meeting that could not wait. The rain had been heavy, the intersection poorly lit. The truck driver had not seen the red light. Jia did not survive the night. Soo-yeon survived, But the doctors used a word that landed on Jae-Sung like a physical blow each time he heard it. Paralyzed. Incomplete spinal injury, they said. Significant nerve damage to both lower limbs. She would require a wheelchair, extensive physiotherapy, and time, a great deal of time, before anyone could predict what recovery, if any, looked like. Time. As though time were something Jae-Sung Lim had an abundance of. He had attacked the problem the only way he knew how. With resources. He flew Soo-yeon to specialists in Tokyo, in Zurich, in Boston. He hired the most celebrated physiotherapists in Korea. He renovated the entire ground floor of the mansion to accommodate her wheelchair, installing ramps, widening doorways, filling the garden with smooth paved paths where she could be taken outside on warmer days. He did everything that money could do. But money could not bring Jia back. And the longer Jae-Sung watched his daughter sitting in her wheelchair and staring at walls, the more clearly he understood that what Soo-yeon had lost was not only the use of her legs. She had lost the will to be alive. The girl who had memorized the birds was gone. The girl who had drawn little hearts in the frost while her mother hummed in the kitchen. Gone, as completely as Jia herself, leaving behind a child who wore the same face and said almost nothing and looked at the world through eyes that had decided the world was no longer worth looking at. Now she sat each morning in her wheelchair by the window, her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed somewhere far away. She rarely spoke without being spoken of first. She ate only when Mal-soon coaxed her with patience and love. She attended her physiotherapy sessions without resistance, but without participation, cooperative as a doll, present as a ghost. The mansion moved around her carefully and quietly, as though everyone inside it understood that something fragile lived there, and they must not startle it. Mal-soon had been with the family since before Soo-yeon was born. She was a woman in her early 60s, small and sturdy, with warm eyes behind rectangular glasses and hands that always seemed to know exactly how much pressure to apply, firm when firmness was needed, featherlight when that was what the moment asked for. She had dressed Soo-yeon every morning since the accident, brushed her hair with the same careful strokes she had used when the child first had enough hair to brush, and told her the same gentle bedtime stories that Jia had started and Mal-soon had continued without anyone asking her to. She was the thread of continuity in a household that had been shattered. She cried in the kitchen sometimes, when no one could see her. Then she dried her hands and went back to work. 8 Rosa had arrived 3 years before the accident. A Filipino woman of 40-something with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural and a warmth that made the vast marble house feel inhabited rather than merely expensive. She cooked, she managed, she anticipated needs before they were expressed. She had mourned Jia in her own quiet way and redirected that grief into caring for Soo-yeon with a ferocity she would never describe as love, but which was nothing else. Both women were the heartbeat of that mansion, and both of them had watched Soo-yeon fade for 18 months, doing everything they could, praying for something they could not name. They did not know that the something they were praying for was already making its way down the street outside. Kofi Amartey was 10 years old and wore his shoes until they had nothing left to give. The ones he wore on the afternoon, everything changed, were worn out, the leather cracked at the toes, the soles thinning where he walked heaviest, the laces knotted in 2 places where they had snapped and been tied back together. They were old shoes, but they fit. His mother made absolutely certain of that. Lucy Amartey had never once let her son leave the house in shoes that pinched or rubbed or told his feet they were not worth fitting properly. Shoes that fit were not a luxury in their home. They were a line she had drawn and would not cross regardless of what the month had cost them. And the months had cost them a great deal. Lucy had come to Seoul 7 years earlier for the simplest reason a person can have, because the man she loved was there. Kwame Amartey was a Ghanaian engineer who had been working in Korea for 2 years when Lucy met him during his visit home to Accra. He was warm and unhurried and loud in the best possible way, and he had looked at her across a family gathering with the specific expression of a man who has just understood something important. 3 months later, she had packed 2 suitcases and followed him back to Seoul. Her mother had called her impulsive. Lucy had called it certain. She had been right. They married the following year in a small ceremony in Itaewon, attended by the Ghanaian diaspora community that had become their family in Seoul. Kofi arrived the year after that. Born in a Korean hospital, named by his father, raised in the overlap of two worlds and entirely comfortable in both. For 5 years, the three of them had made a life in their modest Itaewon apartment that was fuller and louder and more joyful than its square footage had any right to contain. Kwame cooked enormous pots of groundnut soup that filled the hallway and brought neighbors to the door. Lucy learned Korean with the focused intensity she brought to everything. Kofi grew up bilingual and fearless, equally comfortable in the Korean of his schoolyard and the Chui his parents spoke at home when they thought he was asleep. Then the diagnosis came. Stage 3, then Stage 4. 14 months from the first scan to the last morning. Kwame had fought it the way he did everything, with noise and stubbornness and a refusal to let his family see him afraid, right up until he could no longer manage it. He had died in the bedroom of their Itaewon apartment, with Lucy holding one hand and 8-year-old Kofi holding the other, the faint smell of groundnut soup still somehow on the walls. That had been 2 years ago. Staying in Seoul had not been the obvious choice. Seoul had been Kwame's idea, the life there had been built around him. Without him, the city could have felt like a place she was only visiting, a stage set for a life that no longer existed. But Kofi had grown up in those streets, in that school, in that community. He had friends there, teachers who knew him, a Korean that was as natural to him as breathing. Taking him back to Ghana would have been a second loss on top of the first, pulling a grieving child from the only home he had ever known. So Lucy had stayed, and she had rebuilt. She was 32 now, working morning and evening shifts at a community health center, leaving before Kofi woke on some days, home before he slept on others, arranging the hours of her life around his with the precision of a woman who has learned to make structure out of difficulty. The hospital bills from Kwame's 14 months of treatment had not disappeared when he did. They sat in a folder in the kitchen drawer, and Lucy worked her way through them with the same methodical determination she brought to everything else. She did not complain about any of it. She did not have time to complain. She was extraordinary in the way that certain women are extraordinary, not loudly, not in a way that demanded acknowledgement, but in the quiet daily choosing to keep going, keep building, keep showing up for her son, even when the weight of it all threatened to buckle her. She had cried on the subway home from late shifts more times than she could count, in the specific privacy of Seoul train at night, where no one looks at anyone in grief can move through a person without witnesses. Then she would dry her face before she reached her stop, smooth her clothes, and climb the stairs to their apartment with a smile ready. She was also, though she would have deflected the observation with a laugh, genuinely beautiful. Not in the deliberate way of magazine covers, but in the way of a person who carries warmth in their face, even when warmth is not the easiest thing to summon. Wide dark eyes, a mouth that smiled easily, a presence that made rooms feel more inhabited simply by entering them. Kwame had once told her she was the kind of beautiful that made men forget what they had been about to say. She had called him ridiculous. She had believed every word. She still did. Kofi was his mother's son in every way that mattered. He had her eyes, her laugh, his father's name, and a capacity for joy that survived everything. When Kwame died, Kofi had been 8 years old enough to understand the loss, young enough that it shaped rather than destroyed him. He had watched his mother grieve and decided, in the wordless way that children decide things, that his job was to help her feel better, not to replace what she had lost, simply to remind her that good things still existed in the world. So he danced, and he sang. Every single morning, without fail, In their small living room, before Lucy left for her first shift, Kofi performed. It was never the same show twice. Some mornings, it was Ghanaian high-life rhythms he had learned from his grandmother's recordings, his worn shoes finding the beat with an accuracy that seemed too natural for someone who had never had a lesson. Some mornings, it was something entirely his own, a hybrid of everything he had absorbed, wild and unself-conscious, his arms going in directions that arms were perhaps not designed to go. Some days, Lucy barely smiled. The grief was too heavy and the smile too far down. But Kofi never stopped. He danced harder on the days she smiled less, as though he understood that those were the days she needed it most. He had inherited something from Kwame that could not be named precisely, a stubbornness about joy, a refusal to let sadness have the last word in any room he occupied. He also buskied. After school, Kofi performed on the streets, outside the cafes and boutiques, singing with a voice that was still a child's but carried something in it that made adults pause mid-stride and reach for their wallets with an expression of mild surprise, as though they had not planned to give money to a small boy but found themselves doing it anyway. He brought the coins home to Lucy, who accepted them without making him feel like a charity and without pretending she did not need them. She always put half in a small jar on the shelf and told him it was his. He never touched it. It was on one of these afternoons, a slow Thursday in early spring, when the cherry blossoms were just beginning and the city smelled of something new, that Kofi walked past the iron gates of the Lim mansion for the first time. He was almost past the gate, but something made him slow down and look through the gate. She was sitting in the garden in a wheelchair, about 20 meters from the gate, a small girl with her hair in two neat braids and her hands folded in her lap. She was looking at the ground, not at anything on the ground in particular, simply at the ground, the way a person looks when they have run out of anywhere else to look. Kofi had seen that expression before. He saw it every morning on his mother's face in the first few minutes after she woke up, before she remembered she was supposed to be all right. It was the expression of someone carrying something too heavy for their size and carrying it alone. He stood at the gate for a long moment, watching her. She did not look up. Something moved in his chest, a pull he could not explain and did not try to. He had no logical framework for what he was about to do. He only knew that when he saw sadness that deep in someone, his whole body responded to it the only way it knew how. He found a gap in the hedge beside the gate, where the iron bars widened just enough and slipped through. The garden was large and immaculate, full of early spring flowers and the kind of considered silence that expensive spaces cultivate. His worn shoes were quiet on the grass. The girl did not look up until he was about 5 meters away. When she saw him, she blinked, not frightened, simply surprised, the particular surprise of a person who has stopped expecting anything new to happen. Kofi said nothing. He gave her the wide, completely ridiculous smile he deployed specifically in situations requiring maximum effort. And then he began. He started with the high-life step his grandmother had taught him over a video call the previous Christmas, the one that required his whole body to move in a specific undulating way from shoulders to ankles. Then he added the arm flourish he had invented himself, the one that looked like he was trying to fly and failing gloriously. Then he sang a nonsense song in mixed Chui and Korean that he composed on the spot, something about a flower that did not know it was beautiful and a bird that could not carry a tune, but sang anyway because the singing was the point. His voice cracked on the high note. He let it crack. He sang louder. He pretended to trip on his own feet and caught himself with exaggerated drama, staggering sideways and righting himself with an expression of profound dignity, as though nothing unusual had occurred. The girl blinked again. Then something happened in her face, something small and involuntary, a twitch at the corner of her mouth. The kind of movement a smile makes before a person has decided whether to allow it. The kind of movement that hasn't happened in a very long time and surprises the face that makes it. Kofi saw it. His heart lifted. He danced harder. He dropped into a deep squat, knees wide, and began bouncing in place while singing about a grandmother who put too much pepper in everything and a grandfather who pretended not to cry at sad films. His voice broke again. He sang through it. He always sang through it. The girl's mouth opened, and she laughed. It was not a small, polite sound. It was the laugh of a child who had been keeping laughter locked away for a very long time and had suddenly, unexpectedly, lost the key. It burst out of her full and uncontrolled and genuine, the kind of laugh that is almost alarming in its completeness, that takes over the whole body, that cannot be stopped once it starts. And it rang across that immaculate garden, hit the walls of the mansion, and came back amplified. Kofi felt it hit him in the chest like sunlight through a window. He danced harder. He added the robot. He added the dramatic slow-motion run. He added the face, his supreme achievement, a sequence of ridiculous expressions he had refined over years of making his mother laugh on difficult mornings, now deployed at full intensity for this girl who needed it more than anyone he had ever danced for. The girl clapped her hands. She was leaning forward in her wheelchair, her back straight, her eyes bright and completely, entirely alive, in a Malsoon was folding laundry in the upstairs hallway when she heard it. She stopped, set down what she was holding, stood very still. It had been so long since she had heard that sound that for one disorienting moment she did not recognize it. Then it moved through her like something warm, and she understood exactly what it was, and her legs carried her to the window before she had consciously decided to move. Below her in the garden, a boy she had never seen before was dancing for Soo-yeon. He was perhaps 10 years old, dressed in a school uniform that had seen a great deal of use, wearing shoes that were worn down to near nothing but fit him properly. He was dancing with his entire body, arms, shoulders, knees, everything, with a total unself-consciousness that was almost startling, as though the only thing in the world that existed was the little girl in the red wheelchair who was watching him. And Soo-yeon was laughing. Not a small sound. Not the polite, brief, almost smile that Malsoon had been carefully tending for 18 months like a nurse tending a pilot light she was terrified would go out. The real laugh. The one that took over the whole body. The one that Malsoon had last heard before Jia died and had not heard since, and had begun, in the darkest part of herself, to be afraid she would never hear again. Malsoon pressed one hand flat against the window frame. The tears came without permission, and she did not do anything about them. She simply stood at the window and watched and let them come. She watched for a long time. She watched Soo-yeon clap her hands and lean forward in her chair and laugh until her cheeks were flushed. She watched the boy perform with a joy that was so completely genuine it was almost painful to look at, the joy of someone who is giving something freely and feeling it land, who has chosen this particular girl as his audience and is holding nothing back for her. When the dancing finally slowed and the boy turned to leave, Malsoon moved. She went downstairs, quickly for a woman whose knees had strong opinions about stairs, and out through the garden door and across the grass. "Yeah," she called, not sharply, gently, the way you call to a child you do not want to frighten. "Wait a moment." He stopped at the hedge, turned. His body went careful in the way of a child who has learned that being called back by an adult is not always a neutral thing. His eyes, which had been enormous with laughter a moment ago, became watchful. Malsoon looked at him. She had spent 40 years reading children, her own, other people's, the children of this family, and she read this one in about 30 seconds. She did not crouch down fully. Her knees would not allow it, but she lowered herself as much as she could and brought her face closer to his level, which was the intention, and she spoke to him quietly. "What is your name?" "Kofi," he said. "Kofi Amartey." "Where do you live?" "Kofi Amartey." "Itaewon, with my mother." "How did you find this place?" He told her, about walking past the gate, about seeing Soo-yeon through the iron bars, about the expression on her face that he recognized because he saw it on his mother's face and knew what it meant. About the gap in the hedge and the decision he had made without being entirely sure why. Malsoon listened to all of it without interrupting. She watched his face while he spoke, the way he held himself, what he protected, what he did not reach for. She had been a good judge of children her entire life, and she was not wrong about this one. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "She laughed today," Malsoon said. "Do you know how long it has been since she laughed like that?" Kofi shook his head. "A long time," Malsoon said simply. "A very long time." She straightened up as best she could and looked at him steadily. "Tomorrow," she said, "come to the front gate. I will open it for you. You do not need to use the hedge anymore." She said it the way she said most things, plainly, without ceremony, as though it were a small practical arrangement rather than a decision she had made entirely on her own authority, with full awareness that it was not her authority to exercise, and complete certainty that she was going to exercise it anyway. She knew what she had just watched happen in that garden, and she was not going to let a hedge be the reason it stopped. Kofi looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once before bowing. He came the next afternoon at exactly 2. Malsoon was already at the gate. She opened it without a word and stepped aside, and he walked through properly, through the front gate like a guest, and went directly to Soo-yeon, who was already waiting in her wheelchair on the garden path, her hands in her lap, her eyes on the gate. Rosa saw it from the kitchen window on the 3rd day. She watched Malsoon hold the gate open, watched the boy walk through, watched Soo-yeon's face when she saw him. From that afternoon forward, Kofi arrived through the front gate at 2 o'clock and left through it at 4:30. Malsoon opened it and closed it and said nothing to anyone about it. Rosa fed him at the kitchen table before he left each day. Always more than he expected, always warm, and asked him questions about his mother and his school and his father, and listened to the answers with the full attention of a woman who has decided this child matters. Neither of them told Jae-Sung. They did not discuss the decision not to tell him. They did not need to. Some things are understood between two women who have run the same household for years and know each other's minds. Kofi kept coming back each day. He came because Soo-yeon had grabbed his hand as he turned to leave that first day and said, simply, "Come back tomorrow." Not a question, not a request. A statement of fact about the future, delivered with the quiet authority of a child who knows precisely what she needs and has learned that the world does not always provide it without being told directly. Kofi had looked at her for a moment, really looked, the way he had learned to look at his mother when she needed something she was not quite saying, and then nodded once, seriously, as though they had just concluded an agreement of some importance. He kept his word. He always kept his word. Malsoon watched it happen with a joy she kept very carefully quiet, afraid that naming it would make it fragile. Each afternoon, Kofi slipped through the gap in the hedge, and Malsoon found reasons not to report it. She and Rosa had reached an unspoken understanding that what Jae-Sung did not see would not cause him to act, and what was happening in that garden was too precious and too delicate to risk. The friendship grew the way real friendships grow, sideways and unexpectedly, not through grand gestures but through small accumulated things. On the second afternoon, Kofi taught Soo-yeon the high life shoulder roll, and she practiced it from her wheelchair with a concentration so fierce her tongue appeared at the corner of her mouth, and when she finally got it, she threw her arms up, and Kofi cheered so loudly that Rosa dropped a spoon in the kitchen. On the third afternoon, Soo-yeon taught him a Korean children's song and corrected his pronunciation with the particular bossy patience of a child who has been told she is good at something and has decided to take the responsibility seriously. On the fourth afternoon, they sat together in the grass. Kofi cross-legged, Soo-yeon in her chair pulled up beside him, and she told him stories in a way she had not for months. Then she told him about her late mom. He listened without trying to fix anything. That was the thing about Kofi. He did not rush to fill silences with comfort that had not been asked for. He simply listened, and when she finished he said, "My appa died too," and left it there, plain and honest and enough. Soon afterwards, they were giggling about a joke. Soo-yeon's appetite returned. Quietly, incrementally, Mao soon noticed the bowl at dinner was a little less full each evening, and the day after that, a little less still. Her physiotherapist, Dr. Shin, noted in her session report with careful understatement that Soo-yeon had attempted 3 exercises without prompting for the first time since treatment began. She did not know what had changed. She only noted that something had. Soo-yeon talked about Kofi constantly, to Mao soon while being dressed, animatedly, the words tumbling out before she was fully awake. To ate Rosa at dinner, her fork actually moving toward her mouth between sentences. To the stuffed rabbit named Bomi who lived on her bed and received each evening a comprehensive briefing on the day's events. She called him Kofi Appa, older brother Kofi, with the casual certainty of a child who has made a classification and considers it settled. It was settled. For Kofi, the afternoon visits had become the fixed point of his day. Like clockwork after school, he looked forward to the girl in the mansion. The hours in Soo-yeon's garden had become something he had not had in 2 years. A place where he was not trying to fix someone's grief or carry someone's weight, but simply being a child with another child, giving and receiving in equal measure. He did not tell Lucy, his mom, about the mansion. Not yet. Some things feel precarious when described out loud, and he wanted this one to stay whole a little longer. It was the 7th visit, a warm Friday afternoon, when Jae-Sung Lim came home early. He had left a board meeting at 3, which was noted by every person in the room and mentioned by none of them. He had been distracted all week by something he could not name and would not have admitted. The previous evening, Soo-yeon had said good night, and for the first time in 18 months, added I love you, Apple without being prompted. Just like that, as though it were ordinary. He had stood outside her closed bedroom door for a long time afterward, his hand flat against the wood, something pressing behind his sternum that he could not categorize as any business feeling he had ever had. He heard the garden sounds before he reached the gate. He walked around the side of the house and stopped at the garden entrance. He saw them. Soo-yeon was in her wheelchair, clapping, laughing, actually laughing, her face flushed and bright and entirely unlike the face she had worn every day for the past 18 months. The boy was performing an elaborate routine involving an imaginary microphone, a dramatic fall, and a recovery executed with such exaggerated dignity that it was clearly designed to produce maximum laughter from a very specific audience. Soo-yeon was that audience. She was laughing so hard she had pressed both hands to her cheeks. Jae-sung stood very still. He watched for longer than he would later acknowledge. He watched his daughter's face and felt something moving through him that was part grief and part fury and part something else entirely that he was not ready to examine. Then the protective machinery of 20 years of building walls engaged, and the questions arrived in a rush. Who was this child? Who had sent him? What did he want? How many times had he been in this compound? How had no one told him? He stepped forward. Kofi saw him first. The dancing stopped. Every muscle in the boy's body went still in the particular way of a child who has learned, through experience rather than instruction, that adult attention does not always arrive as safety. His arms came in. His shoulders rose slightly. His eyes, which had been enormous with laughter a moment ago, became careful and watchful and gave nothing away. Soo-yeon turned and saw her father. Her laughter died. She read his face the way she had always read it, quickly, precisely, the way a child reads the face that determines the weather of their world, and what she read there made her grip the wheels of her chair. Jae-sung crossed the garden. He stopped in front of the boy and looked down at him. Up close, the boy was smaller than he had appeared from the window. The school uniform was clean, but worn thin at the elbows. The shoes on his feet were old, genuinely, honestly old, the leather cracked, the soles walked down, but they fit him. They fit him properly, and for a reason he could not have explained, Jae-sung noticed that. He looked at the boy's face. The boy looked back at him, not defiantly, not aggressively, but not with his eyes down either. Simply, carefully. The careful watchfulness of a child who is afraid but has decided not to show it. Who is waiting to understand what kind of adult this is. How did you get in here? Jae-Sung asked. Kofi said nothing for a moment. His throat moved. He glanced once, very briefly, towards Soo-yeon, not for rescue, just for a half-second of steadying, and then looked back at Jae-Sung. The hedge, he said. His voice came out quieter than he had intended. There is a gap. How many times have you been here? A pause. 7 times, sir. 7 times. 7 visits, in his own compound, with his daughter, without his knowledge. Jae-Sung felt the anger sharpen, not at the number, at himself for not knowing, at whoever had allowed it, and underneath all of it, at the irrational, complicated feeling that this boy had given his daughter something in 7 visits that he had been unable to give her in 18 months. Appa, Soo-yeon began. Not now, Soo-yeon. The words came out harder than he intended, but he did not soften them. He kept his eyes on the boy. What do you want? He asked. Why do you keep coming here? Kofi swallowed. His hands, which had been loose at his sides, closed slightly. He was fighting something. Composure, Jae-Sung realized. The boy was fighting to hold his composure in front of a man twice his height and 100 times his power. I saw her, Kofi said quietly, through the gate. The first time, she looked, he stopped. Search for the word. She looked like my mother looks, when she is very sad. And I thought another stop. He pressed his lips together. I thought maybe I could help. So I danced. And she laughed. And I came back because his voice dropped almost to a whisper. Because she asked me to. He said nothing else. He stood and waited, his old worn shoes planted on the grass of this immaculate garden, holding himself together with both hands. Jae-Sung studied him for a long moment. Something in the honesty of the answer, the difficulty of it, the way the boy had struggled to find the words rather than deploying them smoothly, landed in him in a way a polished answer would not have. It made no difference. He had made a decision. You will not come back here, he said. This is private property. You do not have permission to be here. Do you understand me? The words were not shouted. They were worse than shouted. They were final. Kofi nodded once. He bent and picked up his small backpack from the grass, straightened, and looked at Soo-yeon. One look, an apology, and a goodbye in the same expression, and then he turned toward the hedge. Appa, no. Soo-yeon's voice broke on the second word. Appa, he didn't do anything wrong. He only came because I asked him to. I asked him, Appa, please, he is my friend. He is the only... Soo-yeon. Jae-Sung's voice cut across hers, and she stopped. Not because she agreed, not because she accepted it, but because she was 7 years old, and he was her father, and the voice he was using did not leave room. Her chin trembled. Her eyes, which had been bright and alive 10 minutes ago, were full. She looked at Kofi's retreating back, at the small figure in the worn uniform walking toward the hedge with his head up and his shoulders straight. Not running, not crying, simply leaving with the careful dignity of a child who has learned that some battles are not his to fight, and the tears spilled over. She did not make a sound. She just cried, silently, helplessly, the way a person cries when something has been taken that they had only just found. Kofi reached the hedge. He paused for one moment. He did not turn around. Then he slipped through the gap and was gone. The garden was very quiet. Jae-Sung stood alone in it with his daughter's silent tears and the absence the boy had left behind, which was larger than it had any right to be. He did not look at Soo-yeon. He could not. Chairman Oh Byung-chul came for dinner 3 days later. He was 71, a man of the old school of Korean business, careful, hierarchical, deeply attentive to the social architecture that money builds and the reputational risks that can bring it down. He had been Jae-Sung's mentor since the beginning, had guided him through 3 major crises, and carried the kind of authority that comes not from power, but from having been right consistently for a very long time. He had heard about the boy. He raised it after the meal, in the study, over tea, with the measured carefulness of someone who has rehearsed the framing. I heard there was an incident. A foreign child. In the compound. With Soo-yun. It has been handled, Jae-Sung said. Good. Chairman Oh set down his cup. An unknown child from difficult circumstances gaining unsupervised access to your daughter. The liability alone, Jae-Sung. You are right to have ended it. Jae-Sung said nothing. She is vulnerable, Chairman Oh continued. Children in her situation form attachments that are not always. He came 7 times, Jae-Sung said. The words came out quietly. In 7 visits, he brought her back from something I'd spent 18 months and every resource I had failing to reach. He asked for nothing. He only came because she asked him to. He paused. I am not certain I made the right decision. Chairman O looked at him carefully. You are reconsidering. I'm sitting with it. The older man was quiet for a moment. Then, in a different register, older, less polished, Jae-Sung. You lost Jia. You are raising Soo-yun alone. Fear is not weakness. It is information. Jae-Sung looked at his tea. The fear is mine to manage, he said, not Soo-yun's to pay for. Chairman O left without pushing further. He had been around long enough to recognize when a conclusion had already been reached. The change in Soo-yun after that afternoon was quiet and terrible. She did not rage. She did not refuse to eat or speak or cooperate. She simply withdrew. Back into the place that she had been before Kofi arrived, the place where everything was dimmer and the world asked nothing of her, and she asked nothing of the world. It was worse, somehow, than if she had been angry. Anger would have meant she still believed things could be different. She ate less. She stopped asking to go outside. She attended her physiotherapy with the mechanical compliance of someone performing an obligation rather than building toward something. The exercises she had begun attempting without prompting, the small, private victories that Dr. Shin had documented with such careful hope, simply stopped. And every day, in a voice that had gone very small, she asked Mal-soon the same question. Is Kofi coming today, Halmiani? And every day Mal-soon said no, gently, and watched the light in Soo-yun's eyes flicker and go a little further down. Mal-soon cried on the 5th evening. In the kitchen, with the tap running so no one would hear. She had not cried like that since Jia. Dr. Shin requested an urgent meeting. She was direct, as good doctors are. The progress of the past 3 weeks has reversed entirely. Her psychological engagement is the lowest I have recorded. Whatever changed in her environment 3 weeks ago was more significant therapeutically than anything we have achieved in 18 months. And whatever changed 5 days ago has undone it. She paused. Soo-yun is declining, Mr. Lim. I'm telling you this clearly because it is my obligation to do so. Declining. The word sat in Jae-Sung's chest on the drive home like a stone. That evening, Mal-soon knocked on his study door. She had never knocked on his study door. In 23 years, she had never once overstepped. She sat across from him and spoke for 7 minutes without pause, the longest speech he had ever heard from her. She told him about every afternoon she had stood in the doorway and watched. She told him about the first laugh, how it had rung across the garden, and she had had to hold the door frame because her legs had gone weak with relief. She told him about the afternoon the 2 children had sat in the grass and talked about their fathers in the plain, honest language of children who have lost something. She told him about the shoulder roll and the Korean song and the expression on the boy's face. Not the expression of someone performing goodness, but the expression of someone for whom this mattered in a way that was entirely real. Then she told him what Jia would have said. She used Jia's name directly, without softening it, because she had earned the right to say it, and because it was true. She stood, dropped the paper with the address of the boy on the table, bowed, and left. Jae-Sung sat alone for a very long time. He thought about Soo-yun's tears in the garden, the silence of them, the way she had not argued or begged after he cut her off, just cried, quietly, the tears going down her face while she watched the boy walk away. He thought about Jia, about what she had always told him. Jae-Sung You're so busy being strong that you forget how to be right. He put down his phone and looked at the paper before he stood up. It was an Itaewon. Then he put on his coat and went out in search of the boy. The building was modest and clean, in a residential pocket of Itaewon that spoke of careful living rather than hardship. Jae-Sung stood outside the apartment door for longer than he typically stood anywhere. Then he knocked. The door opened. He had constructed a version of her in his mind on the drive over. He had expected someone diminished by difficulty, someone worn down, someone who would be visibly relieved to see Lim Jae-Sung standing at her door. Kofi Amartey was none of those things. She stood in the doorway in a simple dark dress, her hair pulled back, as she looked at him with large direct eyes that were already reading him, thoroughly, without hurry, without any of the social adjustments that people typically made when they recognized his face. She recognized him. He could see it. It produced in her no flinching, no performance of smallness, no rearrangement of herself toward deference. She simply looked at him and waited. "Mrs. Amartey, my name is—" "I know who you are," she said. Her Korean was fluent and warm. "Please come in." The apartment was small and very clean and full of things that were clearly loved. A photograph of Kwame and Lucy and a small Kofi on a beach framed on the wall. Books in 3 languages on a shelf. A plant on the window ledge, healthy and tended. A jar of coins on the kitchen counter. It was the home of someone who had decided, in the face of everything, to make something dignified out of what they had. Kofi was at the kitchen table with his homework. He looked up and saw Jae-Sung. His pencil stopped. He sat very still. Jae-Sung looked at him, this time with a smile. He simply looked and saw a 10-year-old boy who had come through a gap at his hedge 7 times with nothing but worn-out shoes and an enormous joy, and had given his daughter back her laugh. He bowed, a real bow, not the full formal bow, but the bow of genuine acknowledgement, which cost him something real, and he paid it. "Kofi, I came to ask you to come back." Kofi looked at his mother. Lucy was standing with her arms folded loosely, watching Jae-Sung with the careful assessment of a woman who has learned that the cost of misplaced trust is too high to pay twice. She was not hostile. She was measuring. There was a difference, and she embodied it precisely. "Why did you send him away?" she asked. The question was quiet and direct and left no room for maneuver. Jae-Sung had prepared answers on the drive over. He discarded all of them. "I was afraid," he said. "My daughter is everything I have left. Someone I did not know had access to her, and I reacted to the fear instead of to what I was seeing. What I was seeing was my daughter coming back to life." He paused. "I am asking you to allow Kofi to return. Because Soo-yeon needs him. Because I was wrong. And because I would like the chance to be better than I was last week." Lucy looked at her son. Kofi was watching her with the patient attention of a child who has learned that his mother's judgment is the most reliable instrument he has access to. Something shifted in Lucy's expression. A calculation completed. She looked back at Jae-Sung. "He will come tomorrow," she said. "But I want you to understand something clearly. Kofi is my son, that he has a heart that gives more than it should, and I will not have him treated as a service. If he is welcome in your daughter's life, it's a blessing. They are only children." "Yes," Jae-Sung said. "I understand." He meant it. She could see that he meant it. That was the only reason she nodded. He said goodbye to Kofi, who looked at him for a long moment with those careful eyes, and then said simply, "I will be there at 3, as though it were already decided. It was. On the drive home, Jae-Sung sat with the realization that he had spent 12 minutes in that apartment and had thought about Kofi Amartey for at least 8 of them. He put the observation away without looking at it directly. He was not ready for that yet. The next day, Soo-yeon heard his voice before he reached the garden. Kofi had arrived. She heard the specific melody he always hummed when he was coming, warm and slightly off-key and entirely his own, and her whole body responded before her mind had processed it. She was already moving her wheelchair toward the door before Mal Soon could say a word. "Kofi Appa." Her voice came out enormous for someone her size, loud and cracked with relief. The voice of a child who has been holding something tightly for 5 days and has finally been given permission to let it go. She was in the garden before her cardigan was on. Mal soon followed with it, saying Sana, and then stopped because Kofi was already doing the greeting dance he had invented specifically for her arrivals. The exaggerated bow, the trumpet sound from his own mouth, the spin, and Soo-yeon was already laughing too hard to feel the April cold. The reunion was immediate and total. 2 children, 1 friendship, as though the 5 days had been nothing more than a pause mid-sentence. 8 Rosa, at the kitchen window, put down her spatula. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. She did not pretend she was not crying because there was no one to pretend for her and she was tired of pretending. Jae-sung watched from the second-floor window. He did not step back from it. He stood where he could be seen because he was done with hiding from things. The turning point did not arrive in a single dramatic moment. That was not how real healing worked, and this was real healing. It arrived in increments, small ones, across many afternoons, so gradually that it was difficult to identify exactly when the tide had changed, only that at some point it clearly had. It began in Soo-yeon's physiotherapy sessions. For 18 months, Dr. Shin had worked with a child who was compliant and absent, present in body, gone in every other way. The sessions produced small gains that Soo-yeon had no investment in keeping, and so they slipped away. Dr. Shin had documented everything carefully and had said nothing to Jae-sung that she could not support with evidence. But she had carried, privately, the fear that Soo-yeon's body would never fully cooperate until Soo-yeon herself decided she wanted to recover. Then Kofi came back, and Soo-yeon decided. It started with her talking about the exercises. She began describing them to Kofi each afternoon. What they were, why they mattered, what they were building toward, with a mixture of complaint and pride that was entirely different from the silence she had brought to them for 18 months. Kofi asked questions. Some of them were medically irrelevant. All of them were genuine. Soo-yeon answered with the authority of someone whose knowledge is being taken seriously, and something in that, being the expert, being the one whose progress someone was tracking with real interest, lit something in her that had been dark for a very long time. She began trying harder, quietly, without announcement, but Dr. Shin noticed. She noticed when Soo-yeon repeated an exercise without being asked. She noticed when Soo-yeon arrived at sessions slightly warmed up, as though she had been practicing alone. She noticed when Soo-yeon began asking specific questions about what came next and how long it typically took. In the garden, Kofi had become Soo-yeon's most devoted audience. He invented a specific dance move for the day. She achieved full ankle rotation. He composed a song on the spot the afternoon. She held herself upright in the support frame for 30 seconds. His celebration of her progress was so completely genuine, so visibly felt rather than performed, that it became something Soo-yeon reached toward as much as she reached toward the physical milestones themselves. Kofi says, "I will walk to the gate by summer," Soo-yeon told Dr. Shin one afternoon, in a tone that made clear she had already converted this from hope to expectation. Dr. Shin wrote it in her notes. Soo-yeon's body began to respond to her returning, well, the way bodies do when the person inside them has decided to come back. The nerve responses improved. The muscle engagement deepened. The sessions overran because she refused to stop. She began taking assisted steps, first with the frame, then with Malsoon's arm, then with Kofi beside her, counting each step with the solemn authority of someone recording something historic. Jae-sung was on the balcony the afternoon Soo-yeon walked the full length of the garden path for the first time. Slow, unsteady, stopping twice, but she completed it. Kofi walked beside her at her exact pace, not once pulling ahead, not once offering his arm unless she reached for it. When she reached the end, she looked up. "Did you see Appa?" "I saw." His voice held. His eyes did not. Dr. Shin's final report used the phrase recovery ahead of projected timeline. In her clinical notes, she attributed it to improved psychological engagement. But at the bottom of the report, she had added something handwritten, something she had never done before in 15 years of practice. Whatever changed in this child's environment, protect it. Jae-Sung read those words 3 times. He folded the report and put it in the drawer where he kept things that mattered. Then he went downstairs to the garden and sat with them until dinner. Chairman O raised the matter one final time over lunch in his measured way, speaking of optics and precedent and the wisdom of clear boundaries. Jae-Sung listened to all of it. Then he said, "My daughter is walking, Chairman. Not far and not alone yet, but she is walking." Kofi walked beside her the entire way, and I watched from the balcony. Everything you are describing, none of it exists in the same world as what I watched happen in my garden. He folded his napkin. I trust my own eyes. Chairman O looked at him for a long moment. Then he changed the subject. He was too wise to pursue a decision that had already been made about something larger than business. Jae-Sung started bringing Kofi home himself. He told himself it was practical. It was not practical. The actual reason was Kofi Amartey, and he knew it approximately 4 days before he was willing to acknowledge it. Each drop-off became a conversation. Brief at first, then longer. Then long enough that both of them had to recognize they were still standing in the doorway long after any practical purpose had been served, and neither of them moved to end it. Lucy listened the way almost no one in Jae-Sung's life listened, fully, without assembling her response while he was still speaking, without mapping what he said onto what she expected him to say. She asked questions that went a level deeper than he anticipated. She disagreed with him, plainly and without apology, when she thought he was wrong. She was funny in a way that caught him off guard. Genuinely funny, dry and self-deprecating, with the timing of someone who has learned that humor is a form of survival and has become very good at it. She talked about Kwame without performing grief. She talked about Seoul with the complicated affection of someone who chose to stay somewhere difficult and has made peace with that choice. She talked about Ghana with the specific warmth of someone who knows exactly which parts of themselves will always belong somewhere else. She asked him about Gia directly, not carefully, not around the edges. What was she like? What did you love most about her? And Jae-Sung told her, more than he had told anyone, more than he had allowed himself to say aloud in 18 months, and was surprised both by how much there was to say and by how much lighter he felt having said it. He started manufacturing reasons to stay longer. He came early. He brought things he could have sent with a driver. He found himself calculating, in the middle of important meetings, what time Kofi finished school. Soo-yeon noticed. She always noticed things about her father first. She reported her findings to Kofi one afternoon in the garden, her voice low and serious, as though briefing a colleague. "My Appa smiles differently when Kofi's name comes up," she said. Not his normal smile, a different one. Kofi considered this. "My Amma does that too," he said. "When his name comes up, she smiles and then looks somewhere else." They regarded each other. "We should help," Soo-yeon said. "Yes," Kofi agreed immediately. "We should." The campaign that followed was executed with the total commitment of 2 children who have identified an objective and intend to achieve it. Soo-yeon mentioned Lucy's name in conversation with her father at every available opportunity. She relayed things Lucy had said, positioned to demonstrate Lucy's intelligence and warmth and general excellence. She asked, with perfectly arranged innocence, whether it would not be polite to invite Kofi's for dinner. Kofi maintained a parallel operation on his end, reporting developments back to Soo-yeon with the seriousness of a field agent. Jae-Sung and Lucy, somehow, managed to fall in love with each other without noticing the campaign at all. The conversation about adoption began on an ordinary evening, late, with Kofi asleep on the sitting room sofa and Lucy sitting across from Jae-Sung at the kitchen table after Mal-soon had gone to bed. He said, "I want to talk to you about Kofi." She set down her cup and looked at him and waited. He told her everything he had been thinking. That Kofi was already woven into the fabric of the house in every way that mattered. In Soo-yeon's face when she heard his voice, in the rhythms of the day that had rearranged themselves around his presence, in the simple fact that the table was always set for four now, without anyone having decided it would be. That he had watched this boy come through a gap in his hedge with worn-out shoes and a song and give his daughter back the will to live. That he wanted to make it real, not to replace anything or take anything, but to add a second home, a second family, the kind of structure that opens a future rather than closing a present. He wanted to adopt Kofi if she consented. Her decision. Kofi's decision. No one else's. Lucy was quiet for a long time. He had learned, in these months, not to fill her silences. She thought in them. They were not gaps. They were work. You understand, she said at last, that Kofi is not a solution to anything. He is a person. I know, Jae-Sung said. That is exactly why I want him in my family. Not for what he does, for who he is. She looked at him for a long time, reading, checking the thing underneath the words against the words themselves. When she found what she was looking for, something in her settled. Talk to him, she said. It is his decision. The next morning, Jae-Sung sat across from Kofi at the kitchen table and explained, as plainly and honestly as he could, what adoption meant and what it would not change. Kofi listened without interrupting. This was rare. When it was finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, Soo-yeon already calls me Appa. I know, and you're already sort of like my Appa. Not replacing my Appa. But he searched for it. Another one. Jae-Sung's chest tightened in a way he had learned, in these recent months, to stop trying to control. Yes, he said. Something like that. Will my mum still be my mum? Always. Nothing about that changes. Ever. Kofi turned it over for a few more seconds. Then he looked up. Okay, he said. Simply. Completely. The way he decided everything. When Soo-yeon was told, she looked at her father with the expression of someone receiving confirmation of a fact they had already established. I already knew he was my brother, she said. It was a late May evening, golden and warm, when the thing that had been growing quietly for months finally arrived at the place where it could be spoken. They were in the garden. Kofi was teaching Soo-yeon a high-life dance she had been requesting for 2 weeks, crouching beside her as she took careful steps, his instructions patient and precise, and occasionally accompanied by an encouraging sound effect. Soo-yeon was concentrating with her whole face, her tongue at the corner of her mouth, her feet moving with the slow, purposeful confidence of someone who has spent months learning to trust her own body and has begun to believe in it. Lucy stood beside Jae-Sung. She had come for dinner and stayed for the evening, and the moment when she might have said she should be getting back had passed unmarked by either of them. The garden filled with Kofi's instructions and Soo-yeon's laughter and Kofi's extravagant celebrations. Neither of the adults spoke. They did not need to. Then Lucy said, quietly, not quite looking at him, I used to think I would never belong here. After Kwame. This was his idea, this city, this life. Without him, I had no original reason to be in Seoul at all. Jae-Sung was very still. But it needed Kofi, she said. And Kofi needed Soo-yeon. And she stopped. He turned and looked at her. She was looking at the children, a small private smile at the corner of her mouth. The one that appeared when something felt exactly right. Lucy, he said. She turned. I have run out of practical reasons to explain why I am in this garden with you every evening, he said. I do not want practical reasons. I want the real one. She was looking at him fully, without deflection, without performance. The real one, he said, is that I am better when you are here. Not because of what you do, because of how you see me. You ask me about Gia as though she mattered rather than as though she is something fragile to be managed around. You disagree with me. You make me feel like a person rather than a position. I have not felt like a person in a very long time. He stopped. It was the most honest thing he had said to anyone in 2 years. Lucy looked at him. Something in her eyes was warm and careful and entirely decided. I know, she said softly. I have known for a while. Why didn't you say anything? She smiled. The full one, the wide one, the one that changed everything about her face. Because I was waiting for you to catch up. In front of them, Soo-yeon got the footwork right for the first time. Her feet found the rhythm. Her body moved with a freedom that nobody in that garden 6 months ago would have dared to imagine possible. She looked up at Kofi with pure triumph. Kofi turned to look at Jae-Sung and Lucy, immediately, directly, as though he had been watching for exactly this moment, and saw their faces. He pumped his fist. Once. Decisively. Soo-yeon followed his gaze and understood, with the perfect instinct of a child who has been quietly engineering this outcome for months, exactly what she was looking at. She looked at Kofi. He looked at her. They both began to smile. The mansion that had been a museum of grief became a home. Not quickly and not all at once. Healing is slower than breaking, always, and rebuilding takes longer than falling. But it became a home, the real kind. The kind measured not in square meters, but in what happened inside it. Mornings filled with Kofi's voice in the hallway before anyone was fully awake, singing something cheerful and too loud that Aunt Rosa complained about every single day and timed her coffee to be ready for regardless. Soo-yeon continued to walk, further each week, then each day, then in distances no one had written in her treatment notes because no one had dared to. Each step still careful, still hers, still counted by Kofi, who had the numbers all the way back to the first one memorized. Malsoon watched it all with the satisfaction of a woman who has kept a garden through the longest winter of her life and is watching what she always believed was under the ground come up. She taught Kofi the Korean words that have no translation, the ones for feelings he had always had but never had language for. He taught her a hodo, the Chui word for joy, and she used it every day. She liked what it meant. She liked that it existed. Aunt Rosa set 4 places at the table every evening and had long since stopped explaining why. Jae-Sung Lim went home for dinner. He sat in the garden in the evenings because the garden was where his people were. He laughed, actually laughed, the full, unguarded kind, at things Kofi said, and the people who had known him for 20 years noticed and did not quite know what to do with it. He was, in every way that could be measured and several that could not, a better man. One evening in July, at the garden entrance where 8 months earlier he had made the worst decision of the year, he stood with Lucy's hand in his and watched Kofi walk beside Soo-yeon as she crossed the garden without the frame, without Malsoon's arm, without anything to hold on to but her own returned will. The evening light was gold. The garden smelled of summer. Soo-yeon walked all the way to the iron gate and pressed both palms flat against it and turned around, laughing. I made it to the gate, Appa. Kofi said I would. He was right, Jae-Sung said. Kofi looked at him over Soo-yeon's head and gave a single solemn nod, the nod of someone whose prediction has been vindicated. Jae-Sung nodded back. It was acknowledged. Kofi looked then at his mother, at her hand in Jae-Sung's hand, at both their faces, and something settled in his chest that he did not have a word for yet. He thought about the afternoon he had stood outside those iron gates and seen a sad girl in a wheelchair and slipped through the gap without knowing why. He thought about his mother on difficult mornings, barely smiling while he danced for her, and how he had never stopped. He thought about what his mother had told him his father used to say, that a person's hands are most useful when they are open. Closed, you keep what you have. Open, you give what you have, and then something bigger comes and fills the space. Kofi looked at Soo-yeon with her palms flat against the iron gate and her face turned toward the sky. He looked at the gap in the hedge beside it, the gap that had started everything. He had come through it with worn-out shoes that fit, a song his grandmother taught him, a stubborn, inherited, undefeatable belief that joy was worth giving even when you were not sure it would be received. He had come with open hands, and something bigger had come and filled the space. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments and tell us where in the world you are watching from. Please don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories. Until next time, stay in love and keep watching.